You can create text directly in 3ds Max, either as straight up raw splines or as a primitive 3D surface. If you just want splines, then you can go to the Create panel, and in the Shapes subpanel, you've got a text object. And you can click and create that text, and once you've created it, go into the Modify panel and play around with some of its parameters. You've got the font and so on. It's all here. But I'm going to show you a new technique which is better and more fun, which allows us to create 3D geometry directly, and we don't even need a bevel modifier to do it. I've got that text object selected. Just delete it with the delete key on the keyboard. And I'm going to go back to the Create panel and the Geometry section. And this time I'm going to create a Text Plus object. And this will give me a lot more control. If you're doing motion graphics, this is going to save you a lot of time. I'll activate the tool, and then I need to drag out in the viewport to define the region of the type. Click and drag, and as I do that, you see those brackets. That's indicating the region the type will wrap inside. If we have a smaller area, then the type will automatically wrap. Pretty cool. All right, there it is. I'll right-click to exit that tool. Just position it near the origin. And I want to go into the perspective view and maximize that with Alt-W. And it looks a little bit weird right now. We can select it and go into the Modify panel and scroll down to the bottom, or even better, expand the Command panel out. We can just drag on this edge to give us more columns to that Command panel. Down here near the bottom, we have a Geometry section. It's got an extrude amount of 0. Let's just set that to -4 inches. And now we've got a thickness to that object. And let's play around with all the cool features of Text Plus. Going back up to the top here, let's change the font. I'll select all of that type there and then change the font here. And you'll have different fonts on your system. I'm going to choose what I've got here, which is Eris Bold ITC. We can change the font for each letter here. That's something you couldn't do with the standard text object that just generates splines. Notice that some of that is in italics. We can select that and turn the italics off. Let's change the actual type in here, and we'll call it Kinet Eco. And now I've got a nice little logo there. And let's play around with some of the controls. We've got the size here. And we've got tracking, which is a global spacing between letters. And if you want to revert any changes here, for example, let's say you've changed up the horizontal scale to make condensed type, but then you decide that you want to revert that, you can change all those parameters back to their defaults just by clicking on this button labeled Reset Parameters. And inside there, you want to enable all of these switches and reset all characters and click Reset. And now we're back to a neutral state. Additionally, you can manipulate the type on a per character basis. Just enable this switch that says Manipulate Text. And then you can click on the circle in the center of each one of those characters and then do things like change the kerning or the scale. Let me get in a little bit closer there. As I hover my mouse, I get a tooltip, and this one is the kerning. If I click there, I can change the spacing, but it's not going to work on that first letter. We got to choose one of the inside letters here. Click on that, and I can change the kerning between that letter and the one immediately before it. Let's go back to the letter K. We can also scale non-uniformly or uniformly. If I want to scale that K up equally in all directions, I could just click on this corner here and increase that. Let's look at that in an ortho view. Alt-W to go back to the front viewport. Scale that up by some amount. Maybe on the E as well. Select the E by clicking on the little circle in the center, and then click on the scale icon in the upper right, and we can scale that up. And notice how it's maintaining the tracking and kerning between adjacent letters. Very cool. All right, so that's how you can manipulate the type. And then finally, if you want to get a bevel effect, let's do that. I'll turn off Manipulate, scroll down to the bottom, and we can enable Apply Bevel. And this gives us a simpler interface to control the bevel than what we saw with that bevel modifier. We can directly change the bevel depth here, or the width if we enable that. So we can have a bevel that's not just a 45-degree angle by having different values here to the depth and the width. And we've got the push amount and so on. We can play around with all these and see what they do. Just be careful that, as with any kind of 3D spline object, if you're doing an outline effect and then generating geometry from that, you might have some issues with some of the polygons crashing into one another. So as I change that outline amount, you can kind of see what that's doing. So be conservative in the values that you put in here so you're not creating too crazy of geometry. Pretty cool. That is the Text Plus object in 3ds Max 2017.